am I. Um, we've got a lot to talk about today, and I think that a lot of the stuff we talk about is feels very conspiratorial, and like there's all of these characters, the Russell Voths and the everyone, the Mike Johnsons and all of these people conspiring, and the authors of Project 2025, Russell Voth, and it's hard to get your head around all the things that they're doing and
Mhm.
all the things they want to do. It's kind of simple, really, but all of the details are kind of convoluted and complicated, probably purposely so. But this story that we want to talk about today is pretty straightforward. It feels like um,
It
you've
should
written.
be.
It seems to be. You have written recently, and also last year you wrote about this a lot, right?
Mhm,
About the potential for banning contraceptives.
mhm.
And I know you got some pushback, and everyone, anytime you say they're going to ban this, we all get labeled as hysterical and this, but it's actually happening now in South Carolina. Can you
Yes.
can you tell us what's going on?
Well, and for some background for people who haven't met me before, I've lived for 50 years in South Carolina. So this is a South Carolina accent. And that's where I was indoctrinated into Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism. So I volunteered for the Republican Party in South Carolina when I was in the
Well,
Republican Party. So, I have a lot of knowledge about South Carolina specifically. So, South Carolina flies under the radar, because Texas and Florida are bigger
right.
and have governors who are, bigger grandstanders and want more attention and whatever, and have other politicians in that vein as well. But South Carolina is really one of the most fascist states in
Yeah,
our country.
it's interesting you say that because, you think, "Oh, South Carolina, the beaches or,
Myrtle
what
Beach.
right. I mean, what it does, it flies under the radar, but that quote, "South Carolina is too small for a republic, but too large for an insane asylum," is brilliant, and it's an old quote, right?
Yeah, it's from James Pettigrew, who was a unionist Charlestonian in 1860. He said that. So, right before Charleston seceded and fired the first shots at Fort Sumter to start the Civil War. So,
Ah,
South Carolina has always been out there. So, they've proposed this bill that would criminalize women for getting abortions, criminalize people, doctors for performing them, criminalize people for helping anyone get an abortion or supplies like medications to self manage an abortion. But they also snuck in language that would outlaw contraception. And I was drawing attention to this last year when everybody else just wanted to talk about emergency contraception
right.
and medications to manage abortions at home. And they weren't talking about the rest of it. And I was screeching everywhere, no, they will ban hormonal birth control. They will ban it all. They hate contraception. And so I was right. This law wants to go through with that and ban hormonal contraception because they say that it creates a hostile environment in the uterus for a fertilized embryo to implant. And to them, anything, if you're a fetal personhood person, as soon as, sperm and egg unite, that is a tiny human being. And even if it's not implanted, it's a tiny human being. And so anything that you do to prevent implantation to them is an abortion. And so when I was growing up in Christian nationalism, I could not have birth control pills for my cramps. I wish I were talking to Lisa Sam. It's like,
Hey,
yay.
I've got
We have to
I've
talk
got
about, yeah, I
I'm surrounded by women, like 3 sisters, 2 daughters, a what like, I have this conversation a lot, so you're safe with
know.
me.
it's
It's a
it's
safe space.
it's just hilarious. But I wasn't allowed to have birth control pills for my cramps. I had severe cramps because my mother told me. My mother told me abortions cause. Those birth control pills cause abortions,
Oh my god.
and you can't have that. So I didn't know that birth control pills did not cause abortions until I went to a gynecologist when I was 22 years old. I mean, she
Wow.
never even took me to a gynecologist. So, and this is typical. This is what they want to take us back to, where women don't know how their bodies work. They don't know what sex is. They don't know how babies happen, and they don't have any supplies to prevent it. And South Carolina is the kind of state that will pass this law. They will pass it. I
Right.
lived there for 50 years. It will absolutely pass, and Governor McMaster will absolutely sign it. So this is a test case for them to be able to have the tools to ban contraception nationwide. And what I want people to understand, and what I'm going to write about on Friday on my Substack, is it doesn't matter if you live in a blue state. It does not matter if you have protected contraception in your state constitution and said people have a right to have it. These theocrats, these white Christian nationalists, hate contraception. And we make the mistake when we talk about this issue of making it about women's bodily autonomy, a war on women, an attack on women's rights. And I'm not saying it's not those things.
Right.
But what this really is about is them imposing their religious beliefs on everyone. And we've talked about before how Christian nationalists worship vengeful, angry Old Testament God. So they believe that vengeful, angry Old Testament God has commanded them in Leviticus. They point to a chapter in Leviticus for this, the third book of the Bible, has commanded them to root out all sexual immorality and impurity in their nation. And as long as they're allowing this sexual immorality and impurity to go on, God will judge that nation. So it is the underpinning, this belief that they must root out sexual immorality and impurity. And for them, sexual immorality and impurity is any sex that occurs, any sex, and any thoughts of sex that occurs that is not between one man married to one unrelated woman. So anything outside of that is sexual immorality and impurity. And they believe that they have been called by God to root that out. They believe God is judging America because they are not rooting that out. And so they hate contraception, not because they want to regulate female bodies, though they will, but because they want to make it difficult and have consequences when people commit sexual immorality and impurity. So they want to make casual sex have consequences. They want to make people who engage in that potentially have to live with an unwanted pregnancy. So that is the point of the attacks on contraception, to make having sex as outside of marriage between one man and one unrelated woman much more dangerous and risky, that you would wind up pregnant and have to live with that consequence for the rest of your life.
I think, an interesting point about this, that we talk about a lot is, this idea of immorality, right?
Mhm,
Is
mhm.
it's just a random definition that they made up. I mean, it's like what you're saying, right? And that's what they want, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's the ability to define the world for all of us according to their sort of random beliefs, or I mean, maybe it's not random.
they
Feels a little
cherry pick
random.
the Bible. They
Yeah.
cherry pick the Bible. And again, you know, 10 different people can read one Bible verse and come up with 10 different things that it means, right? Because
Yes.
that's what faith is. Faith is, this is what speaks to me, and this is what I think it means. But really, only whatever God is at the head of that can tell you what that really means. But that's not how faith works. You
No.
accept it and you interpret it, and it does whatever it does, and speaks to you however it speaks to you. So that's why 10 different people can read the same Bible verse and come away with 10 different meanings. And
Right.
we don't know who's right. Maybe all of them are somewhat right. Maybe all of them are somewhat wrong. Maybe they're all totally wrong. Who knows? So, but Christian nationalists have anointed themselves as, you know, the ambassadors, the voice of God, the one true God.
Right.
And, they know better than anybody else what these verses mean. And so, according to them. And so they are going to force their interpretation of these verses on everyone. So even though the word homosexuality wasn't in the Bible until the 1940s,
Oh
wasn't
my
in
god.
there, they, believe that homosexuality is part of the sexual impurity. You can find videos online, for those of you who might be skeptical or this sounds like conspiracy theories. You can find multiple videos online if you Google this of different Christian nationalist pastors talking about how God is judging America for sexual impurity. They always bring up things like homosexuality in
Right.
that discussion. So, they've defined it based on how they interpret the Bible, and they intend to force everyone in America to live by that interpretation.
The idea that they believe life that a baby doesn't have to be implanted to be an individual human being is bananas. You mentioned that, it doesn't really matter if you're in a blue state, and this feels like a test case. Do you think that's like how worried do we need to be? And I think I
Very,
know the answer.
very.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that. Yeah, I sometimes wish I came in a different package because I just sound like a shrill white woman shrieking about things all the time. But this is a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
And, there's a really good article in the Atlantic today by someone who was in Venezuela in the lead up to them losing their democracy.
Mhm.
And they talk about how it seemed normal and it seemed normal and it seemed normal and then suddenly it wasn't. And that's where we're headed. So millions of Americans right now say, well, everything seems normal.
Mhm.
And so you have to do things to protect yourselves and prepare for the fact that you may not have access to contraception now while you can. Don't wait until, oh no, it's not normal.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I mean, you say you sound like a shrill white woman, but you don't. And I don't care if you did because everyone needs to hear this. And also, the chat is going wild. By
Yeah,
the way, I
I
don't know
see it.
if you can see it. Uh, Jessica Fillion says, "Pardon my French, but that's fucking insane."
Yeah.
uh, and a lot of "Pardon my French" in the chat. Actually, it
Mm,
keeps women slaves to men. I mean, it's absurd on its face, and I think the most absurd thing is it's actually happening now.
mhm.
And so you in your post, I think it was today,
Yes.
yeah, you listed ways, things that we need to do, and I think something that's really prescient to me, and one thing I really love about your writing is that you never sugarcoat and you say this is going to be hard. And as a side note, I used to have this dentist, and right above the chair, there was a poster that said, "The truth is, this hurts." And there was something so comforting about that, about not being lied to about the things that we're going to have to go through.
Mhm.
Your first solution or your first option is to just do nothing and see what happens. I don't
Well,
think
that's what
that's
a lot
really
of
an option.
Americans will do.
It's what most
And
folks will do.
and so, I put that right up front to acknowledge that. But it's imperative that you're working in your communities with doctors, medical professionals, and your local politicians to stockpile contraception and other reproductive health care supplies, including home pregnancy tests now. Because one of the best ways they can track pregnancies is to make you have to go into an office to get a pregnancy test and remove
Right.
your ability to do it in the privacy of your home.
Right.
I am the only person who has been saying that for over a year. So, talk to your local politicians, talk to your local healthcare professionals, and try to get them to invest in a stockpile of these supplies so that in the event that these things are outlawed, you will have a supply available for your community. This applies even more in a household full of women and girls. So in your household, you need to have a cache of these things stored in a safe place, temperature control place. So make sure that everybody in the household knows how babies happen, how their bodies work. Have those conversations. Don't have anybody be in the dark, and let them know that they have these supplies on hand. They need to keep them secret because having these things could be a felony someday. So, but get yes, these things do expire. So this is not going to be a permanent solution that you can just get one cache of them and stockpile it forever. But you can start talking in your communities about how to get these underground systems in place and have these things going forward. Because, like I said earlier with the Venezuela story, once things change, it's going to be impossible to do some of these things. And
Yeah.
we don't know when that's going to happen. So do those things. If you know you don't want to be pregnant right away, but maybe you do someday, go get a copper IUD inserted. Go have that done. Those things last for up to 12 years if you maintain them properly, with the understanding that you're going to have to probably find somebody to maintain it on the down low if these things are outlawed and you don't want to be caught with it. So, but that is a longer term solution for birth control that you can do. If you don't want to have children, I provided resources today for over 1,000 doctors around the country who will provide tubal ligations without asking you a bunch of questions
Right.
and giving you pushback. So, get that done, or make your partner get a vasectomy, which is reversible. The ligations are not reversible. So that's a big decision, especially if you haven't had children, especially if you're in your 20s or 30s. But if you know you don't want children, go on and get that done. Get your partner, your male partner, to get a vasectomy if you can get them to do that, because that's reversible. If you change your mind someday and decide you want to have children, he can get that reversed. So those are all things I put out there. Move to a blue state. None of these things are easy. They all cost money. They all hurt. It's all painful. But you could move to a blue state and hope that that would give you a longer time to prepare and maybe more protection. Or you could move out of the country. Those were the things that I talked about in my
Yeah.
newsletter today.
Um, yeah, not tonight, Satan, which is a great handle, by the way. She says, I'm in California, still a problem. And yeah,
Mhm,
it may not be an immediate problem, but I wanted to ask you about that, about the West Coast Health Alliance,
mhm.
the system they're building. Um, it seems like a firewall. Uh, I don't, do you have, do those efforts give you hope?
Those efforts give me hope for soft secession. You know, the
Yeah, right.
problem the problem with those efforts is that's not going to stop these theocratic Christian nationalists who there are a bunch of them in California. There are a bunch of them in Oregon. There are a bunch of them in Washington.
Yep.
So it's not going to stop those people from working internally to disrupt, to work with the federal government to report people for doing things, to try to cause raids on a stockpile of these things, for instance. It's not going to stop those kinds of things, but it is going to give the citizenry in those states more of a backstop,
Right.
and more, genuine science-based healthcare advice and information. So from that perspective, I'm very excited, and I think some New England and Northeast states are talking about doing the same thing.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. I think hopefully it's a matter of time, and hopefully they build them in a robust way. I mean,
Mhm.
it's, New York is a lot like California. It's a big blue state with a ton of red, you
Yeah.
know?
I mean,
Um,
you kind of live in a purple area, so,
yeah.
it's yeah.
Yep.
So, and
Exactly.
a lot of people don't know that about New York State. So,
Yeah. Couple
the
of blue
other
dots.
thing the other thing we wanted to talk about today was the RFK Jr. attacks on Tylenol, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
write about this tomorrow in detail, so you're getting a preview here at Lincoln Square today.
Yay. Yay.
Um, you know, a few days ago, RFK Jr. announced that they were going to look at recommendations that pregnant women couldn't take Tylenol for pain management because it contributed to autism, citing no real scientifically based anything for that conclusion. And I want to alert people that all of this talk about autism is a smokescreen also.
Right. Of
So
course.
everything these people do is a smokescreen. So last year I made a big deal about a city council member in Fort Worth, Texas, who wrote an op-ed during the Kate Cox debacle where she had to go out of state to terminate a pregnancy that was not viable.
Yep.
And this woman wrote an op-ed and basically said, it's a woman's calling to suffer. And I went berserk about that. I was pretty much the only person who was talking about that statement because it's evangelicalese, it's full on theocratic Christian nationalism,
Right.
drawn from Eve sinned first, God cursed her because she sinned first, pain in childbirth, pain and suffering during
Yeah.
pregnancy, the pain of having to be the mother and be responsible for these children and be submissive to the man is all part of it's a woman's calling to suffer. So, what's really embedded in these statements that would provide pregnant women relief or make pregnant women have an easier time being pregnant is it's a woman's calling to suffer. That's really what's behind this statement. It has nothing to do with autism, but they
Oh
will
my god.
use things like that to try to make their vision of what the Bible is God's plan and foist that on everyone. So, women suffering during pregnancy and childbirth is God's plan. So, therefore, they will try to enact legislation and regulations that make that happen. That's really what this is about, y'all. And that's how we have to start talking about it in our communities.
Yeah, I told my I said to my wife, "Did you hear about RFK and Tylenol?" And she said, "What does he say? It causes autism or something?" Like she was joking. And I was like, yeah, that's what he said, but only in the fetuses of pregnant women." And she was like, "Jesus Christ." And she said, the immediate assumption is it's pretty plain, it's clear. Women have to suffer. That's it.
Women have to suffer, and it also gives them the ability it will give them the ability to regulate women because, I foresee a world where they'll question every miscarriage as, "What did you do to cause it?" Maybe you
Right.
contributed to something that should really be classified as a murder because you took Tylenol, or because you went jogging, or because you drove your car, or because you drank that glass of wine when you shouldn't have, or because you didn't eat right, or because you didn't sleep enough, or
But you have a
whatever.
moral failing. My grandmother had 5 miscarriages, and it was always something nobody ever spoke of,
My
because
husband's grandmother had she was pregnant 24 times in 20 years or something like that and
oh
had
my
3
god.
children.
Yeah.
So that's how many miscarriages she had.
Yeah. And what happens when, those miscarriages, like, if those are people, you need to investigate them, right? I mean, they're deaths
Exactly.
of humans, of citizens.
Exactly.
I mean,
And that is where all of this is headed. And so, removing some of these things that women would rely on to make pregnancy easier for them because they're not safe, because it's a woman's calling to suffer. Then if you use those things, that can be a position that they can take to say, you caused this miscarriage, and therefore this is not really a miscarriage, it's really a murder.
yeah. Um, the
It's very Handmaid's Tale, and I'm sorry, I'm always
it
such
is.
just an upbeat, happy person when I come to speak here.
Well, but look, I think that this is, the hard talk is so important in these times. And the thing is, for most of us kind of normies, like Methodist upbringing, in Kansas, like the most I learned about in church was how to make a hot dish, you
Yeah,
know, and how to drink really terrible coffee in a basement of a church. Um, it the the extremists feel extreme. They feel, it's not a thing, normal people, you compartmentalize the things that are of great concern to you. So you put the thing in front of you that is most pressing. And religious extremists were just never that. they have
No.
taken over our government. And so it's become
And they're
deadly
drunk
toxic.
on their ability to implement everything that they have dreamed about
Yeah.
for decades. I mean, they are absolutely, utterly drunk on their own power right now.
Um, okay. So we talked West Coast, we talked East Coast, and we talked about the ways, things that we need to do. And this is another another thing. I know our audience is always like, "What do we do about anything?" You always give practical, like stockpile contraceptives. That's
Mhm.
a very practical thing we can do. Is there a political solution, or is there a grassroots organizing solution that how do we band together to to hit our representatives, to make our voices heard? Is there What do you see on the political horizon?
Rick's newsletter yesterday about Democrats shutting down the government was amazing. Please tell him
Yeah,
I said that. I
well,
mean, I don't have a lot of hope that they'll do that, but that would be the quickest way we could shut down a lot of this stuff
hmm,
because they couldn't fund it. So, robbing them of a lot of their funding and crippling the federal government right now is what we absolutely need to do. So, bombard your representatives with that message. We demand that you shut down the government. We demand that you, especially the Democrats, because they'll fold, in the
yeah,
Senate. Demand that they shut down the government so that it can hobble this regime somewhat. Um, Work with your indivisible groups and other types of community groups
hmm,
to identify people who can take care of people underground if that's necessary. Identify ways to get supplies. I have a reader and she's here today and she writes a lot about the Rainbow Coalition, and there's books about how they put together those kinds of community support networks. And it's really important that we do that now while we
yeah,
can, and put together in our communities. We're used to looking at screens, not each other. So get out in your communities and find like-minded people and start talking about how to do these things
yep.
so that you can build these toolkits for yourselves in the event that one day you wake up and everything has changed radically.
Yeah, we at Lincoln Square, we've talked about building, local chapters, locally based chapters of pro democracy, you know, people. We'd maybe do Zooms for a Chicago chapter, or for a Philly chapter, or for a New York chapter, and but the ultimate goal would be really to be able to meet in real life, to put
Mhm,
faces with names, and to get offline a little bit, and to have the capacity to build um, underground networks,
mhm,
right? To
mhm.
teach kids history. To
That's going to be so important. And on that note, I have to jump off
Yes,
and
thank
go
you,
to an
thank
event.
you, Andra. Always,
Okay.
always a pleasure. Thanks for putting up with me, and
Oh, I
thanks
love
everyone for
seeing you. I'm
joining.
so happy.
Yay! Okay,
Bye,
have a
everybody.
great day. Bye, all.